In a wood in Woking lies a small plot of land that speaks of forgotten heroism. This was once the final resting place for 27 men who gave their lives to fight for Britain in 2 world wars. But their story didn't start here, for the men who were buried here were all Muslims. Many came from 3,000 miles away in rural India, yet fought in lands they'd barely heard of, and gave their lives for a country they'd never even stepped foot in. This is the tale of 2 unassuming pioneers, a Surrey history enthusiast and a Muslim council worker, and their 5-year battle to restore this Muslim burial ground to its former glory.
Goodness, I'm so excited to see what I'd always hoped to see, the sun glinting on the finial again.
And their search to uncover the lives of the men who were laid to rest here and the descendants they left behind.
I'd like to go and pray at Sikandar Khan's father's grave, just to think about how would he have actually felt when he heard the news of his son's death thousands of miles away.
It's a story of a struggle to bring to life a patch of England
It's all about the heel.
that speaks of a shared heritage, of common values,
We remember those whom you have gathered from the storm of war.
and a world in which Muslims weren't seen as enemies of the West, but comrades who made the ultimate sacrifice for its freedom. It's an ordinary Wednesday in Woking. But in one corner of this Surrey town, preparations are underway for a day that's been long anticipated.
How's it going? Hey, that's better.
Tomorrow is the opening ceremony of the Woking Peace Garden.
The gates are looking good, I think, yeah?
Oh, it's lovely.
In 24 hours, this space will be filled with an unlikely group of people. A royal prince, members of the military, imams and Muslims from all walks of life, all gathering to remember the lives of 27 Muslim men.
These are the badges
Excellent.
you need
Thank you very much.
tomorrow.
And for Zafar Iqbal of Woking Borough Council and Elizabeth Cuttle of Horsell Common Preservation Society, it's the fruit of 5 years of hard work.
It's looking beautiful, actually, isn't it? What a transformation.
Yeah,
Do you remember when we first saw it?
I know.
Who would have thought?
In fact, today marks the final chapter of a story that began 100 years ago. This plot of land was first made into a cemetery for Muslim soldiers in 1917.
The central feature of this garden is the memorial stone. There are 27 soldiers altogether, and they are the actual focal point of this garden.
19 of the men remembered here died in the First World War, many of whom had never before left their hometowns and had no idea of where they were going.
We knew very little about these people when we started off, and it's very pleasing to know that at least for some of them we've been able to find where they came from, who their families are, and what type of people they might have been at that time.
The story of the restoration of this small English garden is one which has echoes across the world. Marup Shah was a soldier in the 129 Baluchis.
We know that these men served in the Western Front, and though we don't know the life stories of those particular individuals, we know enough about the people who traveled with them, felt with them, fought with them in order to partly reconstruct what could have gone through their minds.
4th of August 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. 6 weeks later, the first contingents of troops from British India from a dozen different religions arrived in the port of Marseille.
The British Indian Army became a mighty resource because the British Army very much underestimated the manpower and the firing power of the Germans, and the Britain simply couldn't recruit fast enough. So the figures are quite staggering. Overall, the British Indian Army contributed 1.45 million men.
The 129 Baluchis, the regiment in which Mahrup Shah served, was one of the first to arrive in France. And for men who were largely recruited from poor rural areas of northern India, it was a complete culture shock.
For someone like Mahrup Shah, coming to France must have been an extraordinary experience, because as they arrived in Marseille, there were the local people lining up the street and cheering the Indian soldiers, so they almost felt like heroes. It would have been almost kind of a sense of wonder. One sepoy writes that France is like a fairyland and that each house is a sample of paradise.
But once they reached the front line, wonder turned to horror.
Let's not forget, the First World War is one where warfare becomes completely mechanized. These Indian soldiers are not trained for that mechanized warfare. When you're first confronted with that, that leads to a very deep-seated shock.
In the early stages of the war, the trenches were not more than shallow ditches, and as a result, German weaponry just kind of tears into their bodies.
You have haunting accounts of the churning of the dead. The idea of having to share a space where the dead were literally underground, and the explosion might churn the dead and bring them back up.
No one knows exactly how Mahrup Shah died, but over 3,500 men of the 129 Baluchis lost their lives in the Great War. Zafar Iqbal's fascination with the Muslim burial ground began as a child growing up in Woking.
We used to visit the woods, take a football, even a bicycle, and play around it really, hide and seek and things like that, you know. We were told at that time that it was Muslim soldiers who were buried there. Other than that, really, we didn't understand what it actually meant.
Since the 1960s, the burial ground had fallen into a state of disrepair. Paul Rimmer is the estate manager for Halsall Common, who own the land on which the burial site was built.
Each time I come over here and I see further damage to the structure or graffiti on the walls, I feel very sad that it's being neglected and abused in this way. Because of its remote location, it's been a bit of a hideaway for youngsters having drinks parties. The brickwork has been severely vandalised. The ornate arches and the Portland stone capping have all been removed or destroyed.
The burial ground was in danger of disappearing forever. But for Zafar, the story it told of a shared heritage was too important to lose.
To me, as a Muslim, I think it's very important to understand that the people who gave their lives were part of the British Empire at that time, and they gave their lives for the king and the country. I think that's important, not just for the Muslim community, but for the wider community to understand of our shared histories.
With the centenary of World War I approaching, Zafar saw an opportunity to breathe new life into this historic site. And in 2011, he applied for funding.
One afternoon in February, I took a phone call from Zafar, and he said he'd just heard from English Heritage and that they would be prepared to give us an 80% grant to fund the restoration. And at the end of the phone call, when I put the phone down, I was dancing around the room because I then realised, yes, it was going to be possible. We're going to get it done after all.
Elizabeth Cuttle was assigned to the restoration project to work with Zafar, and Woking Borough Council agreed to fund the shortfall. A week before building is due to begin, the duo are visiting the site to take stock of the enormity of the challenges ahead. The ground's already been cleared of undergrowth, but it's still in a state of neglect.
That's how the bricks are going to look when it's all been cleaned. There's more graffiti in the Shattery, and some people have been carving their names. I don't think you did you, Zafar? Did you carve your name?
No, I didn't actually.
The project will be in 2 phases. The first is to restore the fabric of the site.
If you look up there, you can see the remains of a finial, and it was about 4 foot high, and it was gilded, and it's going to be restored to as it was. So it'll be quite stunning. You'll be able to see it from the road, this shining finial at the top of the dome.
Once the structure is restored, a garden will be planted to make it a place of contemplation.
We have this feeling of some sort of spirituality about the place, which I can't pin down, but you actually do get that feeling when you're actually standing in here, of those people's spirits maybe somehow are still linked to this place.
I think I feel, when they lay here, they were at rest. They'd suffered on the Western Front. And so here, it was all over and they were at peace.
The soldiers' peace is interrupted by the arrival of the scaffolders. And as summer draws to an end, the site is shut down so work can begin.
Sarmas was in the 57th Wales Rifles. They were the first Indian unit to enter the trenches on the Western Front and almost immediately were in action.
The 57th Rifles were involved in one of the most terrifying attacks of the war, the Second Battle of Ypres. It was the moment when the Germans unleashed a new and deadly weapon, with horrifying effect.
I think what makes gas such a lethal weapon is that you can't actually see it, and it corrodes the body from the inside. And remember that the gas masks were not that advanced, and many of them didn't even have gas masks at that point. And what these poor soldiers do is to take off their turbans and then urinate on them and hold it against their noses to combat some of the effects of gas.
560 of the 57th Rifles were involved in the attack. Over half were killed or injured.
The chances are that Sarmas was one of those who received a punishing amount of gas. It will have destroyed his lung tissue, it will have partially blinded him, and it would have rendered him completely incapable as a soldier.
Many of the wounded Indian soldiers were sent to hospitals set up especially for them on the south coast of England. The most famous was the Royal Pavilion in Brighton, and it wasn't only designed to care for the men's medical conditions, but for their religious needs.
The provisions were excellent. For example, there were 3 water taps for the 3 separate religious communities, the Sikhs, the Hindus and the Muslims. And there were 9 kitchens to accord not just with villages, but with caste distinctions.
And there were very good reasons behind the British drive to accommodate the soldiers.
It was imperative for the British war effort that India was kept on side. Without the Indian soldiers, Britain would have effectively lost the war.
Sarmas died on the 22nd of July 1915. And it was to deal with the deaths of Muslim soldiers like him that the Woking burial ground was first conceived.
As with the provisions inside the hospitals, it was hugely important that every community's religious rites for burial would be properly observed. So that would mean for Hindus and Sikhs, provisions needed to be made for cremation, and for Muslim soldiers, a specifically consecrated ground would need to be found where these soldiers could be buried on British soil.
And there was a very particular reason that Woking was chosen for the Muslim cemetery. It was home to the first purpose-built mosque in Britain. Close to Brighton's hospitals, it had its own imam who could preside over funerals. It was the perfect location. And in 1917, the burial ground was opened less than a mile away. It's an important day in the burial ground's restoration. This morning, the team have all gathered to watch the final fitting of the finial on the Chhatri.
My role is to help the top piece into position and down through. I am, in theory, experienced using these cherry pickers, and I did the gilding, so I'm a bit personally involved.
Over the past 11 months, the brickwork and corner towers have been lovingly restored, and this will be the icing on the cake.
They're just about to raise the finial. It should fit like the last piece in the jigsaw, so watch this space.
The finial has been handmade by specialist craftsmen to match the original from 1917.
This has been the most difficult part of the project. The base is a frame of timber, which is the original timber, which has been formed like a barrel. That's been conserved and repaired. The little petal elements on the finial are made from beaten copper, and there's not many people who do that sort of architectural metalwork. So several contractors have sort of come together to fabricate the element.
The difficulties in manufacturing have caused a delay of nearly 10 months, jeopardising the finish date of the entire project.
The finial was supposed to be straightforward. It should have been installed sometime in October, November last year. And now we are in June and we finally got it.
Lowering the finial into place is a painstaking process. An inch wrong could lead to disaster. It's a precarious moment. But after 2 hours of careful manoeuvring, it's finally guided into place. And for the team, there's a great sense of achievement.
It's very, very satisfying because we were a bit concerned about this. It being the last element to go together, and that is a great relief.
Oh, goodness, I'm so excited.
Yeah, I bet, after all of that.
To drive down and see what I'd always hoped to see, the sun glinting on the finial again. It was fantastic.
With the structure of the burial ground restored, work has begun on the installation of a garden. And Zafar's recruited the army to help bring it to life.
Thank you very much for coming. You being here today was a very important part right from the beginning.
What would you like me to do with a shovel?
If I can get yourself just to look at me.
That's the one. Usually we don't wear gloves like this because it doesn't go with our designer clothes, but for this moment we'll make an exception.
They're joined by a group of local school children who'll be planting heathers.
Set them out as you can see in their individual lines and then just fill them round and then that's it. Okay?
I'm Muslim too, and my great-grandfather fought in World War I and he was buried in England as well. I don't know him, but I heard he was a great man.
The garden's been designed according to Islamic principles. And the plants that have been chosen are both practical and symbolic.
And these are Himalayan silver birches. 2 trees on this side and 3 on the other side, which are going to be planted today. And that'll make a total of 27 to represent each of the soldiers who were actually buried at this site.
The trees are being placed around the edge of the garden.
It's good though, isn't it? It's all about the heel.
Down the centre, there'll be a water feature to reflect the Muslim idea of paradise. It's been a long day, but the garden has started to take shape.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. And, most appreciated.
See you next time.
Take care.
Thank you. See ya, thank you.
With the soldiers' work done, Zafar has a moment to himself to survey what's been achieved.
You know, when I started this, I never thought it would be like this. In terms of the complexity of it and what we'll end up with. Because what we really thought about was that we'll just have the walls repaired and possibly have some grass in here and things like that. And it's ended up having a proper garden in here now, you know. I didn't think it'll be this good, to be honest with you. You know.
One of the final tasks for the completion of the garden is the making of the memorial stone to honour the soldiers. And today, Zafar and Elizabeth are visiting a local stonemasons to check on progress.
Hi, Andy. Nice to meet you.
Good to see you.
Hi, Andy. Nice to see you again.
Yes, lovely to see you. Okay, so this is what we've been waiting for.
It looks big, doesn't it?
It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge.
It was very important to have a memorial stone because otherwise the garden wouldn't have a meaning. It would just be an Islamic garden. And it was important to have the names of the soldiers somewhere, somehow. It brings it home to you that they were real people who gave their lives.
The main part of the stone is granite, carved and shipped from India. And seeing it for the first time is an exciting moment.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Yeah, it's brilliant. Right from the beginning, we were thinking of having something like this to be the centerpiece, the focal point.
The main focus.
You know.
When you walk in the garden, your eye's going to go straight to this.
Yes.
The recesses will be inset with Portland stone from the south of England, with the names of the men carved on them. But before carving can begin, the final layout has to be approved. And getting the detail exactly right is a big responsibility.
There's 27 names altogether, and 9 on each panel then, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. If you're happy?
Yeah. If not, we'll never tell anybody.
Once the computer sends the information to the cutting machine, there's no going back.
We are now, by your command, ready to go.
Right.
Happy to do so?
Yeah.
Yeah, take a deep breath, yes.
very difficult feeling to describe in terms of almost an awe of what this actually represents. There is this feeling of importance of writing those names on the stone. You know, for a very long time, people will actually visit this place and will actually be seeing these, Elizabeth, there really, isn't it? And we had a little bit of part to play in it.
Zafar has spent 5 years trying to find the relatives of any of the soldiers, and he's finally made contact with one of them. A descendant of Sikandar Khan. With the garden's completion within sight, Zafar's planned a trip to Pakistan to visit Sikandar's family. Zafar is finally on his way to meet Abdul Nagib, Sikandar Khan's great-great-nephew, and to get a glimpse of the world Sikandar came from.
I'm hoping that when I meet Mr. Abdul Nagib, that I learn more about the life of Sikandar Khan himself as a person. And one of the things I'm really interested in actually seeing is the graves of Sikandar Khan's father and mother, and just feel, you know, how he would have actually felt when he got the news of his son's ultimate sacrifice for a cause which he probably didn't even understand.
Sikandar came from a small rural village called Talokar in what was the northwest frontier of India, now Pakistan. And in the First World War, it made one of the biggest contributions of soldiers to the British Indian Army. Around 240 of its most able men joined up. Amongst them, Sikandar Khan. The Khan family home is one of the most affluent in the village. And for Zafar, meeting the descendant of one of the soldiers he's been working so hard to honour is a humbling moment.
So good to see you. Good to see you as well.
It was nice talking to you on the phone. Thank you.
Abdul's grandfather was Sikandar Khan's first cousin. He built this house in 1905, and growing up, Sikandar would have been a regular visitor here.
What sort of man was Sikandar, and what do you know about him?
Sikandar Khan was living nearby this house, and he was born in 1894. And he was part of our family, which actually had come from Afghanistan, from Kandahar, in 1700s. We had a lot of agricultural land, and so he was a strong young lad at that moment.
And do you know what happened to him and where he fought?
Sikandar Khan was a volunteer, and he went to fight for the British, and he was given some training, especially on map reading, along with other fighting techniques. So he left this village in December 1914 and then went to France. While he was fighting, he was injured. And for almost 5 months, he was being treated, but
he didn't survive.
He didn't survive.
But Abdul's version of events raises a mystery. According to military records, the 82nd Punjabis in which Sikandar served never came to France. In fact, they were stationed in India and then Mesopotamia for the entire duration of the war.
The only explanation for Sikandar Khan's arrival on the Western Front is really that the lines were depleted so fast that the British Army made recourse to troops, smaller contingents that were actually stationed out in Mesopotamia to very quickly plug the line as fast as possible. This could explain why Sikandar Khan ended up in France, embroiled in the trenches.
Evidence reveals that some of the 82nd Punjabis were attached to the 59th Rifles, a regiment that was involved in one of the bloodiest and most horrifying conflicts of the entire war. The Battle of Neuve Chapelle.
The experience Indian soldiers had of that battle was absolutely ferocious. Over 13,000 soldiers killed in that one battle.
The battle took place in March 1915, and the object was to eliminate a bulge in the lines held by the Germans, with the Germans on their side.
It was very, very important that the line was held there, because the fear was if Neuve Chapelle fell, the Germans could overrun the rest of northern France.
The plan of attack was to have a pincer movement, British forces coming in here, Indian forces coming in here. In this particular area here, we're fairly certain was Sikandar Khan, holding the line, facing the German trenches. It is almost certain in that time that Sikandar Khan was hit by bullets or shrapnel or shells and mortally wounded.
Sikandar Khan died on the 25th of September 1915, and there's a poignant end to his story.
Did he have any brothers and sisters?
Unfortunately, no. And he was not also married either.
So really, his father gave almost really the ultimate sacrifice. That it's the end of his line, you know, in terms of future.
As Zafar's visit draws to an end, Abdul takes him to visit the family graveyard. The graves of Sikandar's parents no longer exist. But for Zafar, it's their loss that's touched him most.
In many ways, I do feel sad for Sikandar Khan's father, especially. In our culture, if you lose the only son, you lose the family and the lineage of that family. So Sikandar Khan's father didn't just lose a son, he lost his lineage, and that is very sad, really.
At long last, it's the morning of the opening ceremony, and everyone who's been involved with the restoration of the Muslim burial ground is gathering to celebrate the completion of what's been an enormous achievement.
So we've got the army here, we've got 5 or 6 people from the army here.
Zafar secured a royal guest of honour to open the burial ground, Prince Edward.
Can we have the cloth on this, please?
And so if you stay with
Who's got the cloth?
So before the ceremony can begin, he has to do a run-through of proceedings with Buckingham Palace Press Secretary Colette Saunders.
as long as this comes off quite easily.
Well, can you try it? Yeah?
And he'll just give it to whoever's next to him.
I'm probably more likely to be next to him at that time.
Even on this special day, Ken Donaldson, project manager, and Paul Rimmer have practical concerns on their minds.
Are you saying that steam cleaning will do it, or do we need to use chemicals? I'd rather not use chemicals.
Don't use chemicals. You don't use chemicals on limestone.
Okay.
You need a wetsuit and face protection.
The Earl of Wessex is running late, giving Zafar time to catch up with the Imam for the Armed Forces, who's leading today's prayers.
MashaAllah, good job.
Thank you for everything.
You should be so proud of yourself.
An anxious half hour later, and the royal guest finally arrives.
Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
You've been the architects for this, right?
Yes.
After 5 years' hard work, for Zafar and Elizabeth, it's a proud moment.
May I take you and introduce you to Elizabeth Cuttle? Hello. Well, the person who was delegated to work with me on this, and she'll introduce you to...
Are you all involved?
Yes.
Come we gather around? She needs to talk to you. Yes.
And the ceremony can begin. It's been an unforgettable day. And a reminder of a shared history that might lead to a more united future.
Why it's really important is that this demonstrates the values which Muslims share with Britain. And that is about protecting people's freedoms, protecting security, protecting our country, being united against those people who want to divide our community.
In today's world, where there is so much of Islamophobia, it is very important to reclaim and understand this cemetery, because what it shows the Muslims will just to be are not just religious subjects but warmly human. They gave in their best, they often failed to comprehend, they went through a terrible time, and it is this common humanity ultimately that is far more important than either religion or anything else.
Today marks the end of a long journey for Zafar and Elizabeth.
I think I shall feel a bit deflated, but I shall sit and think about the last few years, all that's been achieved, and how I hope that it will get a life of its own, and the garden, and many people will come to it.
It makes you feel good inside. It's difficult to explain that feeling. I myself maybe have only got 2 or 3 feelings like that in my life, in terms of doing something which actually means something, not just for yourself, but maybe it'll mean something for a lot of other people in future.
It says it all really about remembering those who gave their lives for the country, even though they were from India and were Muslims, and oh, it's just beautiful.
In many ways, you know, it's a humbling experience that God's actually asking you to do something you didn't think it'll be you who will be doing it. You feel thankful. That's the way I feel.